What's the main language in Prague?
Czech.
Czech.
Yeah.
Is there any bit of like German influence or French influence as well?
In the language, or no? No, like the language is Slavic, so it's kind of similar to Polish, Slovakian. A little bit further away from Russian, but it's that route. Like,
So what's the main what are the main issues that you're trying to solve with respect to space flight, I guess the human body, the physiology behind that?
yeah, so kind of, the problem for astronauts is that, when they go into space, there's no gravity. And, the impact of that is that, they're not loaded with the forces that that we're all accustomed to being loaded with every day. And, because our bodies are fantastic adaptation machines, we quickly adapt to that lack of stimulus, because, astronauts have a whole bunch of capacity that they now don't need. And they just start deconditioning really, really fast. And they decondition across, all systems. So kind of, that's a problem. Firstly, from a health perspective, obviously, like when astronauts return to Earth, like if they're super deconditioned, they have reduced health, reduced kind of ability to do things. But then also, this deconditioning is a problem within the mission as well because they lose function. So if you think about kind of them going and doing a spacewalk where the kind of demands are going to be greater, or in the future if they're kind of walking on the lunar surface or walking on the Martian surface, having spent a long time in microgravity and deconditioned, then they're just not going to be, functionally prepared for the tasks that they're doing. So kind of exercise for astronauts isn't a new thing. That's a staple complement of what astronauts have been doing for more than 25 years. It's just kind of the efficacy of that still needs to be improved, and equally, kind of if we're talking about missions to Mars and things, the kind of the space that's available to kind of store exercise equipment is much smaller. So kind of, just to kind of draw a line under that, I mean, currently on the International Space Station, the kind of often quoted statistic is that astronauts spend 25% of the working day on exercise. So it's a huge amount of their time, which reflects the kind of seriousness of doing that. And there's three pieces of exercise equipment on the ISS. There's a treadmill, which kind of gravity is imposed by bungee cords pulling them down. There's a cycle ergometer, and then there's a kind of glorified Smith machine called ARED, which is used for resistance exercise. But as I say, kind of like, the disadvantages of those are that, well, that all takes up a large amount of space, but also that kind of even despite all of this exercise, when when astronauts return to Earth, it's common for them to be deconditioned.
25% of the day is spent exercising.
That's the stat, like, I mean,
And that's
it's
for like
not
what, like a 16 to 18 hour day, basically.
of the working day. So,
Okay.
and that includes kind of setup and tear down of equipment and kind of, showering, etc., etc. But so, so it's not simply exercise activity, but it's a really big chunk. And if you think of kind of how valuable astronauts' time is, one, they're very, very highly trained people, and two, they're in an environment that costs a huge amount of money to put them in it. So yeah, the kind of the value of their time that they spend on exercise is astronomical.
Did you read Scott Kelly's book, Endure?
No, no.
That's a great, and this is like, this is the plug. Is I went to Rutgers, and he went to
Right.
Rutgers like years before me, from up in the Northeast, and I think him and his brother, like the Kelly brothers, have like some of the longest amount of time in space. And then there's like some like Russian astronaut who's got like a little bit longer too, Yuri or something. But Scott Kelly's book, I mean, he talks about it in like huge detail. I mean, he talks about cardiovascular wise, musculoskeletal wise, and then vestibular wise. Everything just went zoop. And he said for the first like couple of weeks that you're back down on Earth, you feel like you have the flu. He's like, you basically can't walk. Everything's just heavy. Everything kind of sucks a little bit. And I think like the mission that just came back, maybe like a few months ago, one of the ladies was saying that she'd like do 2 hours a day of cardiovascular exercise just to mitigate the losses in cardiovascular and musculoskeletal function. Is that enough right now in order to just like slow the decline of those systems?
Yeah, I mean, like as we said, we kind of, they're spending a lot of time exercising, but yeah, it's entirely normal that they get back and they're still deconditioned to some degree. Like, clearly the decline has been mitigated, to some extent, but but yeah, they're still not coming back healthy, and it's not simply a reacclimatation to the Earth environment. It is that their capacity often is less, and it's a really sort of interesting training paradigm because it's completely different to anything else that we do. Like, everything else that we do is largely, I mean, we do have maintenance phases, but it's largely focused on improving our capacity and or hanging on to this. Whereas this is mitigating the loss and actually kind of the main thing that you're trying to replace is 24-hour loading of the musculoskeletal system in activities of daily living, and we're trying to replace that with something which isn't actually like that, with some sort of more, high intensity exercise, which, but yeah, I mean, kind of, so, like there's a big problem here. And kind of where kind of the work that we're doing comes into that, and where kind of we would contend something is missing, and where there's an opportunity to do things better, is that the current kind of suite of countermeasures that you have on ISS doesn't include an ability to impact load the system, apart from kind of jogging on the treadmill, but that's not a huge amount of impact. So the exercise device that I've been helping to kind of test and develop is a sled which is designed to let astronauts jump when they're in microgravity. And the idea then is that, well, as we know, jumping is a really, really powerful stimulus to bone. And to muscle and to other systems, so that kind of if that exercise modality was added to the complement that astronauts already have, that would increase the efficacy of the programs that they're doing. There is some evidence for that. So kind of the terrestrial analog for deconditioning is long-term bed rest studies, and these are horrible. Like, have you come across these? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, yeah, for 6 months, we'll pay you $100,000 just to like not move. It's like
exactly,
bananas to think about.
yeah, and it's also kind of lying. It's head down tilt as well. So like they're at a slight angle. But ESA, the European Space Agency, they did a long-term bed rest study where they looked at yeah, the effect of doing kind of a really small amount of repeated jumping on a horizontal jump sled, and it, with a really modest amount of jumping, it was something like 50 to 100 jumps per day, 6 days a week. They entirely mitigated the deconditioning effect of long-term bed rest. And that's not just bone; it was bone, muscle, cardiovascular, so some other measures of work as well of general functional health. So kind of the potential for jumping as an exercise countermeasure for astronauts is really large.
And does it not need to be a bit of a hop? It has to be like a maximum jump, like you're going up for a slam dunk. Like let's really put a lot of force down into this single jump right here, and then you wait a bit of time and you do it again, maybe in sets of 5 or sets of 10.
Like that's it's a really good question, because yeah, like, and the answer is largely not known. So in the ESA study, they really did. They had some variation, as I remember. I might be wrong, but they did have some variation in the jumping techniques, but they largely wanted them to land very stiff. Which makes sense if you're thinking about bone, because then you're just shaking, banging into your legs. Like the disadvantage of, or it swings and roundabouts though, because if you are landing very stiff, you're giving a strong stimulus to the bone, but you're not using your muscles to cushion the impact. So kind of like you get a larger bone stimulus probably at the expense of a lesser muscular stimulus. So kind of that is one of the kind of key research questions that we have, is kind of, what how should you be jumping? Because there's all sorts of ways that we can jump. Clearly, like we can kind of do small amplitude hopping, one leg, two leg, big jumps, small jumps, stiff landings, soft landings, etc., etc. The other thing with that, which is really interesting, is kind of when you are exercising in space, the kind of the impact of what you're doing on the environment is much more substantial and important than it is in Earth. Because kind of one, well, you're entirely dependent on this structure that you have there, so you don't want to be shaking it too much. And equally, especially on somewhere like the ISS, it's a research platform. So kind of like they've got all sorts of experiments going on, many of which will be vibration sensitive. So you actually can't have someone getting on the treadmill and pounding away, because that's going to affect the integrity of everything else that's going on. So kind of each of the, I'll come to why this relates to jumping, but each of the countermeasures that are on ISS also have vibration isolation systems, that are meant to isolate them from the environment. But if you take the example of the treadmill, so the treadmill has 900 kilos. It has a 900 kilo cradle underneath it to isolate its vibration from the structure. Like
900 kilos?
900 kilos. Like it's insane.
That's
I mean,
that's like almost 2,000 pounds.
yeah, like maybe I can't do the arithmetic in my head, but maybe even a little bit more. Like, and yeah, and again, if you think about the cost of putting 1 kilo into space, like it's a absolutely massive investment to get it up there, and a massive amount of space to that has to be taken up to kind of isolate this from the structure. So kind of how that then relates to jumping, and why jumping is something that kind of, I think kind of NASA have been uneasy about is that, well, jumping is clearly, having impact generally implies shaking stuff, like hitting stuff and having vibration. And equally, kind of, if you have stiffer landings, which might be better for bone, that's more impact that then has to be isolated from the structure. So, kind of, yeah, certainly from a bone point of view, there's a rationale that would make you think that, yeah, kind of stiffer landing would be better for the adaptation. But those forces then have to be isolated from the structure. And that's kind of where the device that we're creating is, or not we, that my colleague has created and that I'm helping him test, is really clever. So the way that this jump sled is created is it has two moving carriages that move equal and opposite to each other. So you sit on the upper carriage or you lie on the upper carriage, and when you jump, you push on a jump board that's connected to the lower carriage. So when you jump, you push the two carriages apart. And the two carriages are connected mechanically, so they move equal and opposite to each other. And there's an ability to add mass to the lower carriage. So what that means is you can have both carriages are of equal mass, and they're moving equal and opposite to each other. So then the impact of that from Newton's laws is, well, those two movements cancel each other out. So kind of the net force expression on the external environment is theoretically zero. So theoretically, this jump sled that we're developing, which I should say is called high frequency impulse for microgravity, or hi-fi, and to give the full credit to kind of its inventor, it was invented and developed and created by a very creative and forward-thinking man called John Kennett, who, and his very small kind of research company in London called Physical Mind London. But yeah, so the concept here is that, yeah, because you've got this equal and opposite movement of masses, like it's just the most elegant application of Newton's laws, such that, well, the exercise equipment itself should isolate, remove the transmission of force and vibration to the structure. So it's kind of a platform that then brings jumping as a possibility for astronauts where it never has been before, but also without having to have, I don't know what it'd be, 900 kilos of additional mass to isolate that vibration from the structure. So it's a very, very clever piece of engineering based on a very simple concept that most of us know.
That's just isn't that Newton's third law? Because the first one's inertia, second law is F equals ma, and third is the equal but opposite
Yeah,
law.
yeah, exactly. So it's a very applied application of Newton's third law.
It's funny because I feel like most people don't think of these things in terms of, like, I know we talk about like environmental impacts with respect to gasoline, hybrid cars, whatever, like 100 different things. But that's an interesting consideration too, because like when I had heard that, you know, there are so many body systems which deteriorate at such a rapid rate when you're in zero G or even micro G, I guess if you're like on the moon or something, you think about like how can we mitigate that with respect to the astronaut's body, but the research vessel is like a whole other thing too. Do you know the price per square foot to send something into space? I know it's crazy high.
Yeah, I don't have the information on the top of off the top of my head, but yeah, like you send, if you want to send an experiment up to space, generally like I forgot what they call it, but it goes in a little sort of standardized box, which like you get like this, and you have to design your experiment so it fits into it, and yeah, like it's thousands and thousands of dollars per kilo. It's very, very expensive. I mean, the environmental things are super interesting in space generally because, kind of everything that you do when you send something up into space, like clearly has to be, properly interrogated, because that's a habitat where if something goes wrong, like there's no, very limited opportunity to get away from it. But if you think about exercise, exercise has big impacts on the habitation. So, one, yeah, we create forces and vibrations. Two, we sweat. So there's a thermal load and there's a moisture load that has to be coped with, and then the other thing is the sound, and the sound kind of particular. So NASA are building or have planned this space station called Gateway, and Gateway is going to be a space station that's going to orbit the moon, but it's tiny. So it's not like ISS, and the exercise space on Gateway is tiny. So kind of that, from a noise perspective, like that really will be important, because you're going to be in a little tin can, and it'll be uninhabitable when someone's exercising if the noise isn't properly mitigated as well.
How does how does NASA get Gateway to specifically orbit the moon? Because isn't the ISS orbiting the Earth? Because
Yeah.
basically you have to get from one orbit to the next, and it's going to be harder to get to the moon because the moon's gravitational pull is smaller than that of the Earth. How do they do that? How do they set a trajectory for the moon, have it orbit that moon? Do they have to put a thruster on it so that when it gets into the moon's orbit, it kind of like stops, thrusts back, and then it gets sucked into the moon again and again and again? And also, why? What are they trying to do with that?
To answer the question on the orbital mechanics, I have no idea.
I'd ask like Neil deGrasse Tyson or something.
I mean, orbit is free fall, so kind of like theoretically, as I understand it, like, yeah, yes, the gravity is different, so the calculations will be different, but like theoretically, yeah, like they're just free falling round the planet, round and round and round, so there shouldn't need to be any active kind of stabilization of that, apart from, as I understand it, these orbits of these man-made objects do decay. So I believe that with ISS as well, they periodically have to give them some thrust. Otherwise, the orbit would eventually decay and they'd crash into the Earth or the Moon. But I'm talking way out of my area of expertise. But I think that's what happens. In terms of what the purpose is of Gateway, I mean, it's in the space industry at the moment. It's really interesting because NASA, who have always previously been the operator of space stations, they're kind of largely saying, well, we don't want to be the operator of space stations anymore. We want that to be taken on by private companies. And, like we see with, SpaceX and Blue Origin and things that kind of, yeah, there's private companies now that are flying, into space. But equally, there's private companies developing their own space stations. So kind of the one that looks likely to be first to do that is being created by a company called Axiom. And they have a contract with NASA, and the way that they're going to build their space station is that they're going to initially attach their first module to ISS and then kind of build off, some more modules before they ultimately detach from ISS, and then they're free floating, and then ISS gets crashed into the sea. But this is all meant to, like it's all very, very imminent, because ISS, I believe, is meant to be kind of coming to the end of its life in 2030. So it's really soon. In terms of Gateway, like Gateway is a NASA, ESA, JAXA, project. So like they're still building that space station, and the purpose for that is, as as a base for kind of the return to the moon, but also kind of as a base for future exploration to Mars. So, like the idea being that a manned mission to Mars wouldn't launch from Earth; it would go from the moon. And I'm sure there's a good reason why for that, but I don't know what it is.
Would that be dependent upon, because if you're going to use the moon as a launching point or a springboard to get to Mars, that would be highly contingent upon where the moon is in its orbit around the Earth and where both the Earth and Mars are in the orbit around the sun. So
Yeah,
they'd have to like get that incredibly precise.
yeah. No, absolutely. Like when I think about it, actually, I guess kind of you know if you launched from the Earth on a trip to Mars, like a big part of that is the actual launch, and there's a massive amount of fuel that would be burnt, in that, and like that's that's a big event that you know before you even get into the 8 month journey or whatever it is. I guess kind of then having a staging post on the moon, it is it like removes that kind of that part, and equally you can build up resource there so that kind of like it you don't have to start with this big launch event that then continues. But again, I speculate, like I'm an exercise scientist that somehow fell into kind of doing space stuff, and I pick up a little bit as as I go along, but it's way out of my kind of knowledge base, really.
It's interesting though, because are you familiar with escape velocity?
Yeah.
Isn't that, what is it, 7 miles per second in order to just reach escape velocity, and then inertia takes over? So I guess from that standpoint, again, like I'm in your camp too. I'm an exercise scientist. I'm not a astrophysicist, but I think it's just interesting to talk about. And then like if someone hears this and they're like, all right, these guys are two fools, like, but I don't know.
It's
I think
okay.
that
We can
it's,
talk about squatting in a little bit, and we'll be fine.
yeah, yeah, then we'll get to the whey protein, whatever. But like, I think it's interesting because I like what you said about reaching escape velocity to get to Mars from the Earth, because it's supposed to take 5 years. At a certain point, you reach space, and then you're on this inertial trajectory of like there's no footing. So even if you're firing thrusters, I guess you can't move laterally because there's nothing to hook onto in space, because space is a vacuum. But if you get onto the moon and you launch from the moon, maybe because there's no gravity up in space, it would be an easier launch to just get into like escape velocity inertia to get to Mars. So it wouldn't take like however many gallons of rocket fuel in order to get there, because in order to jump, so to speak, off the moon, it would take this little push, as opposed to like this huge event, because Earth is sucking us back into its own orbit with its gravity.
No, like I think that's it. Like and again, I'm not very well informed on it. Whether the kind of the idea for a Mars mission would be that you launch from the moon's surface, or whether you kind of are docked next to Gateway and go from there. Like I really I have no idea, but yeah, like that. That's kind of NASA's big project is kind of generally return to the moon and the Artemis project. Which has already begun, and they've already flown around the moon, and but Gateway's a big part of that. But then kind of the idea is to establish a moon base, to have a sort of more permanent base there, and then yeah, like that is the step towards further kind of manned exploration of the solar system.
What is I guess the effect with which you might be concerned about uh, thermal load, moisture load? Like, how much would an astronaut sweat, and how much would respiration and urination, like all these, like the obligatory urine volume, how much would that affect the environment with which they were living in the ISS for upwards of like a year. Is there a way to like decontaminate that moisture into drinking water and it just becomes its own little water cycle on the ISS, or do they just shoot that thing out like right into space? Because you can think about like how humid it would get. Like if I was just in a closed room and I was running in a treadmill, it would get very humid. But because we're on Earth, we can evaporate that water out. But I guess if you're in space, it doesn't really work like that. You can't just open up a window in space.
Yeah, I don't know how they do that as well, but I believe. I mean, I would imagine that they do have to have some sort of mechanism for that. But on ISS is relatively large, so kind of it's not as large a challenge. But kind of Gateway is small, and equally kind of a mission to Mars, would likely, I assume, be even smaller. And it's a long mission. Like I believe it's like an 8 month journey to Mars. So you're talking 8 months there, 8 months back, assuming you're not one of these nutters who thinks that it's a one-way journey. Like the environmental impact of exercising on that is large, and kind of again, it's details of the engineering that I don't really kind of pay much attention to because it's not my job. But all of these environmental factors, are part of the specification when you're developing a piece of equipment like this. Kind of where, as a lead into kind of what I've been doing with this, like where kind of what our work has been is kind of one kind of just establishing with, so kind of like can you exercise on this thing in microgravity? Kind of what are the biomechanics of that? What's the effectiveness of that stimulus? And then the other thing that we've been doing is trying to kind of validate this vibration isolation concept. Like, does this equal on opposite masses thing, does it actually work? So kind of the last 5 years has been, so I've been working on this project, as we were talking about before we came on air, like for about 5 years. And a lot of that research has been trying to test this thing in actual microgravity. And that's pretty crazy because, like, the question is, how do you get a microgravity environment terrestrially? And a microgravity environment that's big enough terrestrially for us to put this big piece of equipment in and to exercise on it. And the answer to that is parabolic flight. Have you come across this, or like?
It's what they did with like Apollo 13, right? In order to film that movie, like they just like flew straight up and they flew straight down and they had all the floating
Yeah,
scenes as they were in free fall. Yeah.
yeah. So that's exactly it. So like the aircraft flies parabolas, so they flies big sine waves, and every time you go over the top of a parabola, you get. It depends on the aircraft, but the aircraft that we were doing it in, you get about 22 seconds of microgravity, and kind of, and the flight is just a series of parabolas. So kind of when we've been testing this, we've been flying from Bordeaux in France with a French company called Novaspace, which is a subsidiary of the French space agency CNES. And they're absolute, I believe the world's best at doing this. They're just fantastic. But yeah, so like with them, like each flight, so they organize these things into campaigns, and the campaign is 2 weeks long. Like the first week is set up, and then the second week is the actual flights. And then of the actual flights, you have 3 flights. Each flight is 31 parabolas. So what, and each, so how it looks is you're flying not flat, like, so that's, 1G. The plane then pulls up to initiate into the parabola. And when the plane pulls up, you pull 1.8G. So like you're almost in a 2G environment. And then kind of they shout injection over the aircraft tannoy, and you go into microgravity. You have kind of 22 seconds of microgravity, and then the plane pulls out again, and you hit 1.8 G again. And then you have kind of 2 or 3 minutes of level flying, and then you do it again, and you repeat it 31 times. So you essentially just have this flight, which is about 2.5 hours, where you're just going 1G, 2G, 0G, 2G, 1G, 2G, 0G, 2G, 1G. So they call it the vomit comet.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I was gonna say I was gonna get sick if I ever did that.
Yeah, like lots of people get sick, and really badly sick.
Have you done it before?
Yeah, so we've
You're
been.
like one of the lead scientists on this, so you gotta test these hypotheses, man. Like,
Yeah. So I don't know how I got this lucky because, as I say, kind of this isn't ever anything that I ever intended to get into. But John, who invented this equipment, kind of came to me. I think it was probably 2018. It was before COVID, so it's probably 7 years. And he, was kind of like, "Do you want to get involved in doing this?" And yeah, so we've actually so far we've done 3 campaigns. So like I've done 9 flights, and we're going again in April for our 4th campaign. So I'll do another 3 more flights. So kind of yeah, like I've spent a lot of time doing this over the last 5 years, and it's super exciting. Like, and what's exciting about it, actually, for me, I mean, we can talk about what microgravity feels like, but for me, that's not what's exciting, and certainly not now. What's exciting is just yeah, the opportunity to go and do you know be fully kind of focused on doing the research, doing the science in a highly professional environment so on the plane, there'll be about 10 experiments. So there'll be 10 different teams on the plane, each, with a range of experiments they're doing in microgravity. Like there's 40 members of staff at Novaspace, supporting you. And you go, you go to France for 2 weeks and just focus on doing this. And then kind of the capstone of that is this, crazy experience where you all go and, float around and try and do research in an environment which is genuinely extreme. Like it is from a physiological perspective, it's a genuinely extreme environment. Because of the not least because of the many changes in the gravity that you're experiencing. So yeah, it's pretty crazy.
what does microgravity feel like? Like for me, like the one thing that you were saying as far as you're going up from like 1G to 2G to 0G back to 1 to 2 to 0, whatever it is with the sine wave, like I think about how much you would get on a free fall ride or even like some sort of roller coaster. Maybe you're doing a loop or a corkscrew. Do you have any idea what maybe like the average free fall carnival ride or a roller coaster is in comparison with this vomit comet?
Yeah, I mean it's nothing like any of those things from the microgravity perspective. I mean, running up to a campaign, there's kind of you have like it's a 6 month preparation period, and the 6 month preparation period is working with Novaspace to kind of set out what your experiment's going to look like. And a large part of that is safety considerations because clearly it's an extreme environment. I am answering the question. I'm just going around in a
Of course,
circuitous.
no. I'm curious. Like this is great. You do a very thorough job of explaining, which I appreciate.
But yeah, so like one of the safety considerations is, well, you can't have stuff floating around, and you don't want people floating around as well. And so when we first, on our first campaign, like Novaspace wanted us to have a net between, so a net from the ceiling to the floor between me sat on, my laptop, kind of, running the instrumentation and hi-fi that's there, and like it made no sense to me at all, like, because you're still, when you're sat on the floor, you have like a little strap, that you're kind of wedged underneath. So like, the first parabola, I suddenly understood the purpose of the net, because like I just wasn't prepared for it at all, and like you suddenly just start lifting off the floor, and I was like, whoa, and I would have ended up on top of hi-fi, like if the net wasn't there, and it's just, I really like watching people who are going into it for the first time and watching their eyes, because and the first flight of a campaign, because a campaign's 3 flights, so often kind of, I mean, there's a lot of people who are repeating, because clearly if this is your area of research, you kind of end up doing it a bit more, and also you get better at kind of winning, the opportunity. But yeah, like on, that first, campaign, it's pretty much like the whole plane goes, whoa, shit. Like just because nothing compares you, nothing prepares you for it. Like, and, like it is something that, yeah, like that's something that's, a constant fixture in your life the whole time, and suddenly like it's gone. Uh, um, yeah, like it's, yeah, it's very hard to describe, but like, as I say, I just, I love watching people's eyes as they kind of experience it first time, because it's just this sort of childlike pleasure, that, like universally, of people like, well, I wasn't prepared for that. And that's, yeah, a crazy, experience.
Is there has there I'm sure like the answer is probably yes to this, but has there been any difficulty in carrying out certain experiments because the equipment or the researchers aren't ready for that sort of just like G forces jostling around? Like, if I was going to do, like, I did a lot of vascular tests and techniques during my PhD, and we did a lot of different ultrasound measures, and we did microdialysis, where you're like basically threading a needle through the upper layer of the epidermis of the skin. Like, I can't do that in 0G. And I'm pretty sure, like, if I tried it, I would just puncture someone's vein. Like, has there been any like learning curves with respect to like, okay, this is how we're going to do this in that harsh environment of space when you are just floating around?
Yeah, I mean, like, I mean, this is, why you have this long preparation period with novice pass beforehand, and when I say that they're, world leading, like you really see it when you work with them, because they think of everything and they have so much experience, and like they can really guide you through that. But I mean, they're very, very rightly very proud of their record, which is they've never had an accident, and they've been operating for, I don't know, 20 years, like a long time. But there are certain things that they will or won't let you do, which is part of that. Clearly, I mean, because safety is always the overriding concern. I mean, for instance, like you can use hi-fi as a rowing ergometer, and that's we tested that in the last campaign that we're on, and that's the reason that we're going to do this new campaign, because we need to kind of optimize the setup for rowing. I mean, the thing about hi-fi is that you have to be in microgravity to use it, because it's designed for microgravity, and the property of kind of its force transmission only works if there's no gravity. But yeah, so for rowing, when you row on it, like there's no seat. Like it takes advantage of the fact that you're floating. So you just kind of like pull backwards and forwards, and there's no seat that's kind of translating underneath you. What we would want to do is, well, we want to be completely untethered, because that's how people would be using it in space. But no, space wouldn't let us. Like we had to have a harness a very loose harness, so you had some floating, but a harness nevertheless attaching you to the equipment such that, okay, if you lose control, you're not going to go drifting, down the plane. And that's just where kind of the safety concern trumps things like, I mean, they do, some very, I believe that they have done some pretty invasive, things, but there'll be big guardrails. I mean, in terms of kind of the first campaign that we were on, we were next to a team from NASA, actually. And that they were doing ultrasound on the jugular vein because kind of I think it was some sort of routine check they did of an astronaut. I think they were actually in the space station, but they found a clot. And so then that clearly became a priority to investigate that. And kind of what they found is kind of like the blood flow. I'll be making mistakes on this as well, but the blood flow is stationary in microgravity, which is crazy, and clearly is a clotting risk. And even I believe that in this study that they did when we were with them on the plane, like even in the 20 seconds of microgravity that you have, in parabolic flight, some of those people were already exhibiting stationary blood flow in the neck. But yeah, they had 4 ultrasounds on the plane, and 4 ultrasound technicians, that were managing to get good images on this. Those people equally were troopers because a couple of them got violently ill, and still kind of managed to do their work before they, disappeared to be miserable at the back of the plane. But yeah, it's a really exciting environment to do research in because it's, everywhere else where you do research, it's kind of like, okay, well, if we've got a problem, we're just going to stop and think. And you stop and think, don't you? And you think until you've got the answer. You can't do that on this thing. Like the plane will keep flying its parabolas because there's 9 other experiments. They're not going to stop for you. Unless it was a critical safety concern, they're not going to stop for you. So yeah, you are making, you rehearse a ton to be prepared, but equally you're still making, judgments on the fly, in a chaotic environment. Which is exciting. And the other thing that makes that hard as well is because of the motion sickness. They give you a motion sickness drug, but it's a motion sickness drug called scopolamine, which was previously used as a truth serum, and seriously, and the kind of the use of it as a motion sickness drug is an off-label use of it. But I believe it, it's very, they use it because it's very effective. So you go and get kind of, 45 minutes before the plane doors close, you go and get injected with this drug, which helps you not be sick. But it also means that kind of the floor starts moving weirdly, you have some, weird motion artifacts from that. And equally kind of in the afternoon, you get a hangover from it. So the whole kind of thing is, just crazy, really.
These are things that I feel like a lot of people don't think about. If your team launches this product in the foreseeable future and it ends up really revolutionizing the health and longevity of astronauts as they traverse space, no one's going to know these downstream behind the curtain testing measures. That's wild. And I was even thinking the price of this too. You think about getting a commercial plane ticket for a couple-hour flight, and it's okay, it depends on the time of the year. It's all about economics and supply and demand. But then you think about doing this and the risk involved. It's I imagine the funding for this must be pretty crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if these are secret details, but kind of if I believe, if you wanted to go and charter, the plane from Novospas for your own private campaign, so that's a 2 week, the preparation, 2 weeks, 3 flights. I think it's in the low millions of euros. Like it's kind of like 2 million euros, or so something like that. So kind of but like as I say, you're kind of like there's normally about 10 projects on the plane, so you can sort of divide that up as to what the value in kind is of being given the opportunity to be on that experimental platform. But like it's a large, like a very large investment. I mean, how it's done in Europe is, kind of ESA, so the European Space Agency, they charter, a flight from, or they charter campaigns from Novospas 2 or 3 or 4 times a year, and so that's paid out of ESA's budget, and then there's a competitive process by which researchers can bid to kind of get awarded that space. And that's a core part of Novospas's business, and they also do the same for CNES, so this the French Space Agency, and DLR, the German Space Agency. So kind of they're doing Novospas, I think, are doing something like 8 to 10 campaigns a year, for these different European space agencies, and that's their business. But yeah, like it's a crazy operation. And I don't believe, currently that, there's something of that scale and professionalism in the US, actually. Like that, again, it's kind of, there are parabolic flights that are flown in the US, but they're on smaller planes, and, they're not sort of structured in these big campaigns. It's it's a huge, huge kind of event.
Are there enough kinks, I guess, with which your team is being worked out that you're like confident that this project is going to end soon? You're going to find a completion of like, all right, this thing pretty much works. Or is there still like many more vomit fueled parabolic sine wave flights in your future?
I mean, I mean, so kind of, we're actively, working, with ESA to try and put this on Gateway, because actually ESA have the responsibility for the exercise equipment that's going to be on Gateway. Like that's part of ESA's contribution to that platform. But we're competing against other teams that also want to put their equipment on Gateway. Like, I know, I think that we've shown it works. Like, I think that we've proved the concept in terms of the vibration isolation. I mean, that's my opinion. I mean, we have published on that, but like I think there's refinement of the engineering, and but I do think the concept works, and it's a huge mass and space saving if you don't need to have these big vibration isolation systems. Then there's like when we first went, we just didn't even know if you were going to be able to do that activity at all, right? Like it's, or will we be able to repeatedly jump? And equally, hi-fi is a kind of space age Pilates reformer. So I mean, that's it's where the design comes from. Like John is a Pilates instructor, and then a former aircraft engineer. So you kind of put those two things together, you end up with this piece of engineering. But yeah, like every exercise that we try on it. So we, like we have chop and lift, and kind of like D1, D2 patterns, and like every single time you do an exercise, though, like you don't know if it's going to work because it's in microgravity. So you need to have kind of constraints, and restraints put in a certain way so that someone can work it. So we've kind of demonstrated quite a large menu of exercises are possible on it as well. But there's still a huge amount to kind of. So I do think that the concept works. And from what I've seen in this space, I do believe that hi-fi. I strongly believe that hi-fi is the best piece of exercise equipment that's out there. It's just our job to kind of convince ESA and NASA that that's the case. But like we've done a lot with these, in microgravity, but there's still, like that's the only environment that you can test it terrestrially. And to me, it makes sense that, okay, well, if you're going to give the best package of exercise, to astronauts, that, well, we should be, optimizing both the engineering but also the exercise prescription, by doing the thing that, although it's super expensive, is cheaper than than doing it on ISS.
Yeah, is there any, I guess one thing that like I'm thinking about right now too is like obviously like the idea of mitigating these vibrations through the vibration isolation systems. Is there a way, or like has there ever been a way or a thought or an experiment to which they put those vibrations to good use? Like I always think about like someone who wants to get fit and watch TV at the same time, they can like hook up their bike to like some sort of generator to power the TV. Was there ever a way to do that with respect to like the Smith machine, the cycle ergometer, the treadmill on the ISS to generate energy through that kinetic energy and transmit it to electrical energy?
Yeah, like it's a great thought. Like I don't know what has been done in terms of legacy pieces of equipment, but I think the answer is no. Like it is something that we're looking at. Um, because clearly, yeah, there's energy there that could be repurposed, And again, if you're in smaller habitats that are further away from home base, that would become increasingly important. It's just an engineering challenge.
I bet. This has been this has been awesome. I want to thank you
Thank you.
for. I had a whole Google Doc of different questions I was going to ask you and different themes, and we touched upon none of them. And I'm really happy that we talked about space because I think it's hot topic in the news. It's very interesting. There's endless amounts of science and technology and engineering and math that goes into that, and I think you being at the forefront of that really helps shed light on the attention of this. And I think it's important. So really thank you for sharing all this today, Dr. Cleather.
No, thank you for having me. Like it's nice to talk about it. It's fun.
Awesome.